This is the lesson video for lesson 2.18, Modern Classification. This is the last lesson for Unit 2. So in this lesson, what we're going to be talking about is how scientists classify organisms today. So last lesson we did talk about how scientists use a unique two-part name to refer to every species on Earth. And remember, the two parts to that was the genus and the specific epithet. Okay, so it would be the genus, which we said was like the last name of an organism, right? It shares it with other common organisms. And the specific epithet is more like the first name, which is the unique name for that specific species. Here it describes the specific epithet as a descriptor, describes the specific species, which is unique to other species. And so here's an example. There's a type of bird called a wood warbler, and they are colorful, they're active, and they live in the Western Hemisphere. There's lots of physical similarities among all these birds, such as size, shape, number and structure of feathers, and certain shared characteristics. However, scientists have actually identified 20 different species within the wood warblers. And so what you see here is that although these organisms do have shared characteristics, there are differences. For example, they are different colors, how they sing is very different, and their mating preferences are unique as well. And so the similarity shows you that they probably belong to the same genus, but the differences clearly show that they probably have their own specific epithet to describe their species. So we see here's one example of a wood warbler, and here's another one. They look different, but in fact they do have a lot of similarities as well. So how scientists classify these organisms is that they have a ranking in groups, and each group is more inclusive than the one that precedes it. So here's an example. Here's just a typical room, and let me go ahead and use the example of, let's say you have many things in your room. You could have things like clothes, you can have paper, you can have furniture, you can have music, etc. Right? There are many different things that you can find in your room. Right? These are things in your room. And we can break these down even more. So what types of clothes can we find in our room? We can find things like shirts, pants, underwear, hats, etc. Right? And then with the shirts, we could even break that down even more. We can break it down into long sleeve, and we could break it down into short sleeve. Right? So what we see is that we started with room, right? And then we said we would talk about all of the things in the room. Then we took clothes and broke it down into the different types of clothes we might have. Then we took shirts and broke that down even further. And this is how biologists organize organisms now based on their similarities and differences and their evolutionary history. So the broadest and most inclusive grouping of life is called the domain. So just like we talked beforehand, where we were talking about all the things in the room, right? That was the most broad characteristic, right? Where we had things like clothes, music, paper, etc. That would be the same thing as the domain. And all life is classified into one of three domains. Okay, so you see here, it is the most general characteristic. Okay, so at the most broad level, we look at the most fundamental characteristics, such as what the cells are made of, right? How they get food and what their cell chemistry is like. This again are shared characteristics among all organisms in the same domain. And then from the domain, we can then look into the kingdom, right? And kingdom is a little bit more specific. It breaks it down a little more, right? And then it breaks it down a little more into phylums, then class, order, family, genus, and then the specific epithet, which is the most specific category, which is where we have our species have very unique names. So this whole concept of organizing life into those three domains is actually a recent development. Before, scientists used to just separate organisms from prokaryotes to eukaryotes. And the reason why they linked all the prokaryotes together is because all the single cell organism lacked nucleus, and they thought that that was a very common characteristic that they can start off with. However, when scientists began to study the RNA sequences of prokaryotes, what they figured out was that the bacteria and the archaeans actually should be in two very distinct categories. Before they separated the organisms in three different domains, the kingdom level, which is right below the domain, was the highest category. And so we had things like animals, plants, fungi, protists, and Monera, which included all prokaryotes on Earth. However, with this new discovery, scientists believed that we should include a more general classification, which would be the domain, including three different domains, being the eukaryotes, the bacteria, and the archaeans. So why are archaea and bacteria different? They both are single-cell prokaryotes, which seems like they would be very similar since they have very similar structure. However, they are grouped into two very different categories because of where they live and how they function. So archaeans have actually very unique RNA sequences that enable them to live in extreme habitats. So that could be areas that have high temperature, such as thermal hot springs, volcanic vents, acidic pools, and extremely salty water, places where no other organisms would necessarily be found. Another example would be the Archaean methanogen, which lives in the digestive tracts of cows. It produces the greenhouse gas methane inside cows' bodies, which cows occasionally release by belching. And so we see here that these organisms are unique from bacteria because of their ability to live in these extreme habitats. Bacteria are organisms that cause disease. Not all of them cause disease, but that is one characteristic of some bacteria. Another characteristic of bacteria is that they are the decomposers in ecosystem. So the bacteria that lives inside our bodies help break down food. Eukarya includes all organisms made of eukaryotic cells. So again, our domains, what we've talked about, is we have the bacteria, right? Archaea, and then we also have the eukaryotes. Okay, remember these two right here are actually prokaryotes. Okay, so all other organisms besides bacteria and archaeans are considered eukaryotes. And here are some examples. This snake, this mouse, trees, fish, and us. We are all, so each species has a unique taxonomy. So here's an example. If we were to look at this flamingo right here, we could see that it clearly is a bird, and birds are eukaryotes. So that means at the broadest level, which means at it would be at the domain level, it would be placed in the eukarya domain, where other animals, plants, fungi, etc. are included as well. And because they all are in the same domain, we can also say that they all have a common ancestor as well. Birds are animals, so we can put them in the kingdom of Animalia, along with other organisms like honeybees, bears, and jellyfish, right? And so what this shows you is that because flamingos are in this kingdom, they must be more closely related to honeybees than a certain plant, because they share the same kingdom. And so we can go all the way down this list, and clearly this gets more and more specific as we go down until we reach its genus and specific epithet, which is its scientific name. And so again, this is another example of how scientists would classify an organism. So that classification scheme that we saw with the flamingo can really be used in any example. It can also be used in this sugar maple tree that we also looked at in the previous lesson. We see that just in the same way, it's found in the eukarya domain, just like the flamingo. However, the kingdom is different. It's found in the plant kingdom, and then we can go all the way down to become more and more specific to classify this organism properly until we reach the end, where we have the scientific name of the sugar maple tree right here. And so again, this is just another example of how scientists organize these organisms based on their evolutionary history. So far, scientists have almost described 2 million species on Earth. But again, like we learned last lesson, there might be anywhere from 5 to 20 million total species on Earth. And so clearly the scientists are not done. It's important that they continue to discover new species so that we can continue to fill in the evolutionary history of all life. One way that scientists organize all of this information is in phylogenetic trees, and these phylogenetic trees really help us see how animals or organisms in general have evolved through looking at their common ancestors. And so we see everywhere that it says CA, that's a common ancestor, and when it branches off from that CA, like right here, then that means that the organisms have diverged from one another from their common ancestor. So they are moving in a different direction and becoming a more distinct species. And so here we see the cnidarians, which are jellies and coral, are more closely related with animals with bilateral symmetry since they share a very recent common ancestor. However, if we look down here, we see that all of these organisms have this common ancestor. So here, these organisms here would be actually less related with these animals here because their common ancestor was from a long time ago. So a summary of what we went over for this lesson is that all life on Earth is divided into 3 domains. We have the archaea, the bacteria, and the eukarya. From those domains, we can then break them down even smaller until we get to the specific epithet, which is their unique name for their species. And so this is the way that biologists have classified organisms today to increase better communication between all scientists, and also to really map out the evolutionary history of all these organisms. So some important vocabulary from this lesson is domain, which is the highest rank or most general group. Eukarya, which is the domain that is made up of eukaryotic cells. We have archaea, which are the single-cell organisms that live in extreme habitat. Remember, they have those unique RNA sequences that allow it to. We have bacteria, which are single-cell organisms that act as decomposers and can also cause disease. And then to organize all of this, we have phylogenetic trees that really show that evolutionary history and highlight the common ancestors between all of the organisms.